a nosy person. In college / post-college, when I was a single man, and actually probably even as a married man, when I lived in an apartment complex, if I heard a big ruckus in a next door neighbor, or I heard something that just seemed out of place. Like if they had kids and the kids were always making noise, I wouldn't do this. But if I heard something that seemed out of place, I was notorious for sticking my ear up against the wall to see if I could hear what was going on. And then I figured out that actually if you put your ear with a cup against the wall, you can hear even better. But here's the thing, even though I'm nosy, I know a lot of people that are even nosier than me. And in some of you, I won't call you out by name, but some of us are nosy. I had a roommate in college that it was after I became a Christian, that if he found your quiet time journal, and in your journal, if your journal did not say, please do not read, he was notorious for picking up your journal and reading things that were intended only for you and God. And you talk about being afraid of somebody being bipolar, you read their quiet time journal. It's a bit of a scary thing, but my roommate was notorious for that. You all have actually heard him preach before, so you can deduce to who you think it might have been. But some of us, right, we read our children's diaries growing up. We found them. Will doesn't have a child. He can't read his child's diary. But we read diaries. Or if we see a police car or a fire truck down the street, we can't help but come out of our out of our houses and kind of see. Or we're driving in a car, right? And this is how I know you're all nosy to some capacity. Because when we're driving in a car and there's a bunch of lights, what happens to traffic? It goes slow. Why? Everybody's rubbernecking because they want to know what's going on. To some capacity or another, many of us are rather nosy. And we actually enjoy eavesdropping on one another. Please do not raise your hand, because if you raise your hand to this question, you'll never be invited to anybody's house ever again. But I know there are people that do this. There are people that when they go over to somebody's house and they go in the bathroom and they use the person's bathroom, that they start opening drawers and cabinets and medicine things to just figure out what is going on. Some of you are looking at me strange, and I know it's a cover because you do it. But here's the thing, many of us, we're nosy, we're eavesdroppers. We like to be in the know. We want to figure out what's going on, especially if there's a ruckus.
It's human nature.
It's human nature. Thank you, Miss Donna. Well, this morning, as we continue in the book of Hebrews, we're actually going to eavesdrop on God. And it's actually rather remarkable, the type of language that the author or preacher is going to use. And I'm going to highlight it, but what he's using, it's different than what anybody else uses in our New Testament. Actually, even many times Jesus, which is a bit strange. But so we'll dive in together. Oh, I forgot about my meme. That's me if I owned a robe. Hebrews chapter 1, we're picking it up in verse 4. So he, meaning Jesus, became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. For which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have become your father"? Or again, "I will be his father and he will be my son"? And again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." And speaking of the angels, he says, "He makes his angels spirits and his servants flames of fire." We'll pause right there. What's really interesting about what the author of Hebrews is doing is notice he doesn't say it was once written, or it was spoken through the prophets long ago, or God said through his people, or most of the time, even think about the Sermon on the Mount. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus again and again, he says, "It has been written," or "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago." And introducing God's word, they never say God says. Even Paul in his language, he's going to say in the scriptures or through the law and the prophets, or that it was said. But here the authors or the preacher is doing something different. He doesn't say in the scriptures, or it was said long ago, or you've heard through the prophets, the laws. He doesn't. He says God says. And so what we're doing is we're eavesdropping on God's conversation. We're eavesdropping on things that God says, specifically to two different entities. To his son Jesus, and to these divine beings. The Hebrew word is Elohim, or angels. And it's important for us just to pause here for a moment, because as we come to a Christian faith, we recognize that there is a physical seen realm and a supernatural unseen realm. If we believe in Jesus, we believe in other divine beings. You've heard me say that Jesus is the God of gods. When I'm saying that, what I'm saying is Jesus is the divine being over all other divine beings. He is the king of earthly kings, but he's also the Lord of heavenly beings. Are you with me? If you don't believe me, well, you believe in Satan if you believe in Jesus, right? Divine being. We believe in Gabriel, or the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament. And so what's going on here, it's almost like the curtain's being pulled back, and we're a fly on the wall, eavesdropping on God's conversation with his heavenly host, the angels, and his son. Are you with me? It's remarkable. The language that's used, the preacher goes to an extra length, not to say it was written in the scriptures, but this is what God says. Really, really incredible stuff. We're going to be holding up a glass on the wall of the heavenly realms to listen to this conversation between God and Jesus, the Father and Jesus, and the Father and the angels. You with me?
Yes.
Well, as we dive into this, there's a few things that are worth pointing out about angels. So, up until this point, the scriptures hadn't yet existed. So, what people would do to bring others to faith in Jesus, when they would use scriptures, like we do Bible studies, right? We use the Bible to help people come to faith in Jesus. Well, what they would have done is they would have used the Old Testament scriptures to help people to see that, oh my gosh, this is about Jesus. And what the author's doing in this dialogue is he's putting angels and Jesus in juxtaposition to one another. He's comparing and contrasting angels. And so they would have been highly familiar with all these different situations that angels were involved with in the Old Testament. And so we're just going to briefly highlight a few of these situations where angels are present to hopefully open our eyes to what they would have understood, what their worldview would have been. And as they come into this conversation that Jesus is having, this would have been the backdrop that they would have understood that conversation. So, the first thing, in terms of angels' participation in our Old Testament, angels pre the birth, death, resurrection of Christ, is one that they were present at creation. Angels were there when God created the earth. Job 34, verse 7. God speaking to Job, he says, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know." He's being facetious with Job. "Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy." What Job tells us is that angels were present at creation. The second thing is that angels were notorious for ministering to God's people. So angels are present at creation back in Genesis chapter 1. We don't see angels again until Hagar and Abraham. Hagar, right, is the mother of Ishmael. And an angel actually appears to Hagar. and ministers to her to ease her fears, her insecurity, her bitterness, and to give her purpose and mission. Three angels appear to Abraham himself, right? When he hosts them and doesn't realize that he's hosting angels. We see angels rescue God's people. Genesis chapter 19. Angels come in. Two angels come into Sodom and Gomorrah. And who do they rescue? Lot. They rescue Lot from wicked corruption. And actually, Lot has this great fear and reverence towards them. But the city, the men in the city want to take the angels for themselves and want to sleep with them. It's disgusting. But we even see this compare and contrast oftentimes when God's people or people that have a healthy understanding of God come face to face with angels, and specifically the angel of the Lord. Their response is reverence and honor and fear and glorification, where people that aren't trying to align themselves with God, it's the complete opposite. And they're going to be on the terrible end of God's judgment because of that. We see God rebuke his people through angels. That's Judges chapter 2. We see them be angels of judge, that they're agents of judgment. Where is it? It's 2 Kings. No. Oh, Exodus 12. Being agents of judgment, right? The Passover. That if they didn't put the blood posts above their doors, that angels came through and wiped out the firstborn of both humans and animals. They're present at the giving of the law on Mount Sinai with Moses. And they possessed an immeasurable power. One angel, the angel of the Lord, kills 185,000 Assyrians in one night. So this is the backdrop of angels. That they were ministers alongside God. They were servants of God. They're agents to God. And they're also angels that worked in opposition to God, that didn't want to exist under his authority. And that's going to be Satan and kind of his minions, his posse. But this is our backdrop of the conversation. Are you with me? So dive with me back into Hebrews chapter 1. So peering into the heavenly realms, coming into this room where God is having this conversation with his son and angels, and comparing and contrasting these different entities, the son and these heavenly beings. To Jesus, he says, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." And what he's going to do in this conversation this morning is he's quoting Psalms that are Davidic Psalms / royal Psalms. Or he's going to come into David's life and quote from an interaction that God has with David. This is hugely important because when we think about their view of Scripture, what God's promise to David is, "I will establish your throne forever." However, even though that's the promise, it doesn't happen. In 587 BC, first it's the Syrians, right? Then it's the Babylonian Empire come in, wipe out the Israel and Judah empires, right? God's people, and put an end to this bloodline. And so the way Jews understood these royal psalms that were written by David or about David, the way they understood them was that the bloodline of the Messiah would come through David. And so this is a psalm of David in Psalm 2 verse 7 here in verse 5. But they would have understood this as a promise to come. Are you with me? Same thing when speaking of David in 2 Samuel chapter 7, he says, "I will be his father, he will be my son." Here's the broader context of 2 Samuel 7, 13 and 14. And this is David. This is God speaking of David and his bloodline. He says, "He is the one who will build a house for my name. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father and he will be my son." There's the quote. "But when he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands." So it's this dual purpose in this communication with David. I'm going to establish your throne forever, and his throne's going to continue through his son Solomon. But when Solomon sins and the lineage after him sins, God exercises his judgment and his wrath on David and David's bloodline. However, God still gave David this promise that your throne's going to last forever. So how is it that this promise to David is fulfilled? Well, it's fulfilled through Jesus. It's these royal psalms that are about the bloodline of David. So peering into the heavenly realms, what we see is this conversation between God and Jesus simultaneously saying, man, you are my son, and your throne is going to exist forever. Talk about a cool conversation. It's much better than the conversations I heard in my walls in my apartment. But of the angels, verse 6, one is quoted from Deuteronomy 32, verse 43. It's a song of Moses. It says, let all of God's angels worship the Son. So we see that the angels are inferior to this Son. Though they possess great power, though they are agents of judgment, though they have the authority to rebuke God's people, they are much, much more inferior to the Son. These angels, these heavenly beings, worship the Son. Verse 7, he makes his angel spirits and his servants flames of fire. Again, it's going to be a royal psalm, but this time he's giving them, the angels, their name. They're servants. They're ministers of the Lord. And so he's putting angels in their proper place. He's not devaluing them by any means. I mean, go back and read some of the things that we just looked at about these angels. It's remarkable, it's scary, it's overwhelming. But he's saying, yeah, but all you are agents of mine, servants of mine. There's someone with a name that far surpasses my name. And this is the thrust of this morning's message. Is, yeah, angels are great, but Jesus is infinitely greater. Infinitely greater. And it really is just a continuation of last week's message. And the 7 things we saw about Jesus, right? He's the prophet that reveals God. He's this incredible sacrifice that saves us and purifies us. He's the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. He is God, and not just God, but the God of gods. And so what he's doing is he's elevating Christ, that Jesus is the greatest, that Jesus is superior, Jesus is supreme. But he continues, and what he does here, man, we just really miss because we don't have the Jewish background and our understanding of these royal psalms. Verse 8, but he says, but about the Son, he says, again, it was written, but he says, we're eavesdropping on God's conversation. He says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. Jesus' throne lasts forever. And the throne that he sits on is built upon both justice and righteousness. 2 words that are uniquely used to define the character of God. It's remarkable. It really is. And church, like, this is an opportunity. We're going to take a pretty big step. But anybody who devalues Jesus from God is wrong. They're wrong. And there are plenty of shoot-offs from Christianity that do this. Whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses, whether it's Mormons, which are big denominations that for some reason fall under the umbrella of Christianity, but they devalue Jesus. They separate Jesus from God, and we can't do that. We can't, because the Bible doesn't let us. And so we come face to face with, oh my gosh, like this man who's sitting on God's throne is God. He holds justice and righteousness. He's built on that foundation. But he also says, verse 10, another royal psalm, 102. In the beginning, the Lord Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth. This isn't new to us. We talked about this last week. And the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you, Lord, you Son of Man, you Son of God, you Jesus, you remain. Everything else will wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe. Like a garment, they will be changed. But you are the same today, tomorrow, and forever. Another quote later on in the book of Hebrews. But you remain the same. The Father speaking to Jesus. And your years will never end. The Father is elevating the Son. This is his induction into the seat of judgment, sitting at the right hand of the Father, ruling over all of creation, both the heavens, the unseen realm, and our seen realm, the earth. Jesus, at God's right hand, yes, resurrected, but more than just resurrected, exalted to the right hand of God. Jesus is King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and God of gods. Incredible language. And what's so special is all they're doing is they're helping people understand who Jesus is through the Old Testament. Because God can't lie. So they're entering into these promises given to David, these great statements made by David in these Psalms, saying Jesus is the fulfillment of all of this. That Jesus, the line of David, is the Messiah and the exalted King. He is far superior than any angels. And then going a step further, one of the most quoted Psalms in all of the New Testament, Jesus actually quotes this psalm of himself when he's talking to the Pharisees or the Sadducees, and he says, how is it that the bloodline is supposed to come from David when David himself says, my Lord sit at the Lord's right hand, right? And so right after that, this is that same psalm, Psalm 110, to which the angels did God ever say, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. So it's actually a rather violent image. And it's purposeful. It's not a passive king. Yes, he's the king of peace, but he's also a conquering king. And this is crucially important because of what he says in verse 14, are not all angels ministering spirits, serving spirits, sent to serve those, us, who will inherit salvation? Not at all intending to help us be insecure about salvation, Christians be insecure about salvation, but instead imploring Christians to persevere because Jesus has already won. And we are just waiting for his second coming. All will bow. All will be on their knees because his foot is on the neck of their throats. That's the same thing. I don't know why I just said that. But it's remarkable. He's elevating Jesus. Jesus is far greater than the angels. And we've touched on this. But I want us to think just for a moment, right? Because I highlight these things, but there's something that he's going to address in chapter 2, but I think it's important for us to wrestle with right now, because we come face to face with, all right, Jesus is greater than angels. Jimmy, I still don't understand why that's important, because we really don't hold angels in that high regard. We probably should, but just in our culture, our worldview as Westerners, we just don't. And so it still kind of misses us, right? And it misses me, because even as I read through this, it's like, all right, why on earth are we talking about Jesus being greater than angels? Like, I'm at church, I know that. But I think there's an application here that's crucially important for us. My wife and I, we were watching the Taylor Swift documentary this week or last week. I became a Swiftie in the process. But it is a bit sad. VIPs would come back into a room. I'm assuming it's after the concert, maybe it was before the concert, and you'd see the reverence that they would offer Taylor. And they'd come back there. Some of them were so excited that all they could do is kind of like jump in place, and they wouldn't say anything. It was kind of awkward. And Taylor's like, "Hi," like. And another person, they come in and just instant tears, and the guy holds his hands and he says, I just want you to be a witness of this. And then he gets down on his knees and proposes to his girlfriend. And I was like, all right, were you more consumed with Taylor or your soon-to-be wife? in that moment. Other people are so overwhelmed with joy and adoration that they're sitting there like weeping and overcome with emotions because, oh my gosh, it's like the pop queen of Gen Zs and millennials. Like it's Taylor, and it's just these moments of great adoration, great fear, great respect, great honor, which is actually very similar to the way Hebrews would have interacted with angels. Hey, go back and look at it. Oftentimes when an angel comes to a Hebrew, they'd fall on their knees and worship, and the angels would have to correct them and say, no, you don't worship me. You worship God. I don't think any of us in here you guys are huge Taylor Swift fans, but I don't imagine either of you would cry. I definitely don't think Will would propose in front of her. That would be a bit awkward. But as I was thinking through this, there are people that all of us greatly respect and admire. That if we had the opportunity to go back and be a fly on the wall, man, it would just speak volumes to us. And I was thinking of different situations. I think some of us, man, it would be spectacular to sit in the war room of Franklin Roosevelt or Winston Churchill. And to hear the conversations, to hear the decisions, to glean things from especially Winston Churchill's leadership. I adore Winston Churchill. I love reading about Winston Churchill. Maybe we would love to observe or follow around Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks for weeks or months. To be captivated by their endurance and their faith and their hope and their belief that humanity can be and should be better. Some of us would love to follow David Goggins around or Jocko Willink and be trained by them to get a six-pack and pecs that are out of this world. Others of us would love to be a fly on the wall for the conversations Michael Jordan had with Kobe Bryant. To sit in the room and go on walks with Steve Jobs, Bob Iger, Benjamin Franklin, or Albert Einstein. I did just put Bob Iger in the same category as Benjamin Franklin. Maybe it's to sit on the boat with your ancestors who immigrated here from the United States. Or to hang out with your grandfather again before he passed. Maybe it's to hike the frontier with Daniel Boone or travel to Japan with Phil Knight before he creates Nike. I don't know what it is for you, but I know beyond a shadow of a doubt there are people that you respect and admire. I don't say idolize, because hopefully we only idolize Jesus. Yeah. But I imagine that if you're able to be in those moments, you would hang on to every word that dripped from their mouths. The journal that you carried with you, you would jot down everything you could because you'd want to share it with your children one day. Like you imagine the respect that you would give, the honor, the reverence. You'd be really reluctant to talk because you just want to hear what they have to say. You want to be present in those moments. What do I think we can glean from this morning's message? Is they have the same response to God.